Night covered the mountains with a deep and familiar silence. However, that tranquility was broken by an unexpected sound near the outer traps. The cabin dweller reacted instantly, believing some animal or pest had invaded his territory. Armed and alert, the hunter stepped out into the darkness to eliminate the threat. His keen senses swept the perimeter, seeking the exact origin of the disturbance. He prepared to attack without hesitation, determined to end the problem in a single move. The man swung the axe down violently, aiming to silence the intruder for good. But he stopped the blow when he realized there was no enemy to fight there. Confused by the emptiness, the hunter questioned his own hearing for a brief moment. That's when his eyes finally landed on the small being left at his mercy on the ground. Cautiously, he picked up the abandoned child, still trying to process the absurd situation. The baby slept serenely, completely oblivious to the intimidating presence of that man. As he held the child, a strange curiosity replaced his previous fury. At that moment, his partner appeared, drawn by the unusual noise. In the middle of the night, her shock was immediate upon seeing the scene, forcing her husband to try to explain himself quickly. The hunter tried to formulate an explanation to his wife about the unexpected child in his arms, stammering nervously in the face of the situation. However, silence prevailed. The couple shared a moment of mutual understanding under the moonlight, accepting that new responsibility. The narrative, however, shifted to an ancient legend. Blessed rains fell from the heavens, ending difficult times. The barren land regained life, and the people once suffering sang songs of joy and gratitude for the sudden change in destiny. The village found an era of lasting peace, protected from threats and free from the hunger that once plagued it. Rumors spread about the origin of that prosperity, attributing it to the mysterious powers of an enigmatic figure from the past. The young man closed the book abruptly on his lap, ending his reading about the legend of the gentle wizard. Ariane Chirone, now 12 years old, spotted a familiar figure approaching and cheerfully called out to his father. The hunter's face lit up instantly at the sight of his son, all the weariness of work disappearing into a smile. He lifted the boy easily, spinning him in the air amid laughter as he announced it was time to go home. The man hugged Ariane tightly, showing a deep and protective affection for the child he chose to raise as his own. As they walked, the father questioned his son's fascination with magic, comparing it practically to the brute force of an axe or an arrow. The casual conversation, however, did not go unnoticed. Two boys watched the pair from a distance with malicious curiosity. The observers focused their attention on the object Ariane was carrying. Finding his interest in books strange, they noted the obvious discrepancy between father and son, commenting that the boy bore no resemblance to Mr. Vincent. The hunter felt his blood boil upon hearing the malicious whispers left behind. The ignorance of others about his son's origin tested his patience. The urge to react violently against that insolence was almost uncontrollable. He clenched his fist tightly, struggling to contain his aggressive instincts. However, he took a deep breath and decided to ignore the provocation. It wouldn't be worth causing a scene and ruining the boy's special moment. To his relief, Ariane Chirone seemed completely oblivious to the malice. The boy was radiant. His mind focused only on his insatiable curiosity about the world. The father softened his expression as he responded to his son's enthusiasm. As they walked, Chirone's innocence helped to dissipate the tension the man felt. The young man's joy was contagious. It was the first time they had traveled together far from home, and he could barely contain the excitement of the adventure. The hunter stroked his son's head with paternal affection. Even without understanding that interest in books, he was determined to support the boy's happiness. For Chirone, that day represented the fulfillment of an old dream. The world seemed vast and full of possibilities waiting to be discovered. The conversation about magic dominated his thoughts as the scenery changed. The horizon opened up, revealing the destination that so fascinated the young scholar. The city finally appeared before them, imposing and complex. The stone walls guarded a center of civilization, very different from the simple life in the mountains. Shirone absorbed every detail with fascination. Everything around him was completely new to someone who had grown up isolated in the forest. Urban life pulsed with vibrant energy. The boy marveled at the decorated shop windows and the elegant clothes of the locals. The market was bustling with activity and unfamiliar sounds. Ordinary people went about their routines, oblivious to the little visitor's wonder. The cart finally stopped moving upon reaching their destination. The journey of discovery needed to pause so the work could begin. His father had business to attend to and needed to separate from his son temporarily. He instructed Shiron to wait for him in a safe place until he finished his deliveries. The father needed to leave for his business, but first gave strict instructions. He trusted Aryan's obedience, but paternal concern always spoke louder before a separation. As soon as the hunter walked away with the cart, the young man found himself alone in the unknown city, free to explore this new world on his own. Aryan wasted no time being idle. He soon found an opportunity to be useful, using his rare writing skill to help organize the prices of a local stall. The old vendor gladly accepted the collaboration. While the man rested, the boy took on the administrative task with a contagious and unusual enthusiasm for his age. The merchant watched the boy's diligent work with deep approval. It was rare to find a child with such initiative and natural competence for numbers. Impressed, the man decided to reward the effort. He interrupted the work to ask what the young man would like to receive in exchange for that unexpected help. Aryan's answer was immediate and full of energy. He didn't want money or sweets, but information on the subject that occupied all his thoughts. The boy explained his logic about ancient legends, drawing an evolutionary line between dragons and warriors to justify his true interest, the existence of magic. With hope plastered on his face, he specifically asked where he could find written records about those fantastic stories to deepen his studies. The merchant laughed at that insatiable thirst for reading. Amused by the situation, he indicated exactly the place the little scholar needed to visit. The pointed direction revealed a bookstore across the street. For Aryan, that building represented the promise of answers he had sought throughout his childhood. The young man could barely contain his gratitude. He said goodbye hastily and ran towards the establishment, with anxiety accelerating his steps. Alone again, the seller decided to browse an old volume he owned, his curiosity aroused by the boy's specific questions. However, upon examining the familiar illustrations and text, his light expression turned to absolute shock. He realized a disturbing connection. The book narrated the legend of the gentle mage. The old man understood that Aryan's innocent search touched on forgotten truths that went far beyond simple fairy tales. Aryan tried to reach the work, but was abruptly stopped before he could even feel the texture of the cover. The owner made it clear, aggressively, that the knowledge contained there was not intended for someone of his social class. Fortunately, the sound of the door opening interrupted the reprimand, diverting the woman's attention to the entrance. A distinguished gentleman entered the room, causing the merchant to immediately change her posture to serve the noble client. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, the boy flipped through the pages frantically, trying to absorb every word before being expelled. Outside, Aryan laughed at the irony of the situation, finding the barrier imposed on something as simple as reading absurd. Shortly after, he saw the client leaving the establishment carrying a box full of those precious books. Driven by an uncontrollable impulse, the young man ran after the man, refusing to let that knowledge escape. To his surprise, the gentleman dumped the entire contents of the box on the ground without the slightest ceremony. Aryan froze in place, completely shocked by the cruel fate given to the works he so desired. Those books, so protected inside the store, now lay in a pile of trash, discarded as useless scraps. While the nobleman walked away indifferently, the boy remained there, staring at the abandoned treasure in the gutter. With his hands trembling with emotion, Aryan rescued a volume, feeling that fate was finally smiling on him. Two ladies from high society passed by, finding the presence of the commoner fascinated in the middle of the dirt strange. They continued on their way amid futile laughter, completely oblivious to the invaluable value that the boy had just found. Aryan recalled his father's face, seeking comfort in the memory of that stern but familiar look. However, the reality around him was very different, bringing up bitter questions about acceptance. The boy felt the weight of exclusion as he walked, wondering why the world treated him like an intruder. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted when a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. An officer stopped him firmly, making it clear that this was not a place allowed for someone of his class. The imposing structure of the gate seemed to reinforce the insurmountable barrier between the two worlds. Luckily for the young man, the guard's attention was diverted by a sudden call coming from another direction. The law enforcement officers exchanged hurried information, losing focus on the prisoner for a crucial instant. Aryan noticed the lapse in vigilance, and his survival instinct kicked in. The officer felt the sudden movement too late, reacting with frustration as he realized his mistake. The boy had slipped out of his coat, leaving the man holding only an empty piece of fabric. Humiliated by the audacious escape, the guards began shouting orders, starting a frantic search of the area. Hidden in the nearby vegetation, Aryan tried to silence his panting breath, waiting for the danger to pass. When silence returned, he began to clear the traces of his escape, removing the leaves that betrayed his hiding place. But as he looked at himself, relief gave way to a new worry. Explaining this mess to his father would be difficult. During the hasty escape, the young man realized he had left something important behind on the stone floor. Aryan quickly retrieved his lost shoe, trying to compose himself after the desperate run to escape the guards. However, a voice from the other side of the wall captured his full attention. Someone was lecturing on the very definition of magic. Hearing the students ask the headmaster for demonstrations of spells, the boy immediately understood the magnitude of where he was. He had accidentally stumbled upon the walls of the Magic Academy. The instructor inside proposed an intellectual challenge to the students instead of just conjuring flames. Aryan's heart raced with excitement. He pressed his ear to the wall, eager to absorb the discussion about wisdom and effort. The lesson touched on a crucial point for him. The professor questioned what would be, after all, the most indispensable talent for mystical learning. The boy held his breath outside, desperate for an answer that could validate his own impossible dreams. Inside the room, the enrolled students awaited the revelation with astonishment, oblivious to the presence of the clandestine listener. The old master, however, seemed to be amused by his pupils' doubt before proceeding with the teaching. The moment of suspense was so intense that even the surrounding nature seemed to have silenced itself to hear the truth. Aryan listened carefully as the voice explained that magic was an intrinsic law that existed within the world. Suddenly, the boy shuddered, feeling an abrupt change in the atmosphere or a noise that interrupted his trance. The instructor paused his speech for a moment, sketching a smile that suggested he had noticed something or someone out of the ordinary. Panic took over Aryan. He pressed himself against the cold stones, fearing that his academic espionage had been discovered. Aryan felt his heart pounding in his chest. The fear of being discovered momentarily paralyzed him, turning his curiosity into pure panic. The realization of his mistake was immediate. He knew that there was no way to retreat without being noticed, and that his presence there would bring consequences. The fright caused him to lose his balance. His feet slipped from the safe edge of the wall, betraying his attempt at stealthy spying. As he desperately tried to hold on, the young man was consumed by deep regret. He realized too late that this impulsive decision would cost him dearly. Gravity overcame his resistance. Aryan felt his stomach churn as he realized that the fall towards the courtyard was inevitable. The scene below was one of peace and study, a brutal contrast to the chaos he was about to cause by plummeting onto the class. The old master, however, maintained his composure, observing the situation as if the interruption were just another curious part of the lesson. Aryan emerged awkwardly over the low wall, interrupting the sacred silence of that elite class and exposing himself completely. Shame and pain mingled in his mind. He wished he could disappear before having to face the judgment of those present. The young man's body finally met the ground with a dull thud. The accidental invasion was complete, and there was no turning back. The high wall now loomed behind him, no longer as a hiding place, but as an insurmountable barrier that blocked his immediate escape. The boy stood up, feeling small and out of place. He had physically invited a world to which he knew he did not belong. The imposing atmosphere of the academy weighed on him. Aryan realized the magnitude of the problem he had gotten himself into by crossing that border. The students' reaction was immediate and cruel. They recognized his simple clothes and shouted with indignation against the presence of a commoner in their exclusive sanctuary. Aryan was stunned by the sudden hostility. The innocent dream of learning magic collided violently with the harsh barrier of social prejudice. The old wizard didn't show irritation at the intrusion. On the contrary, he faced the intruder with genuine and amused interest. Faced with that presence, Aryan confessed his true desire. He admitted that all he wanted was to witness real magic, something he'd never seen. Upon revealing he only knew about it from books, the boy sparked the noble's anger. The students immediately accused him of lying, doubting a commoner could read. Embarrassed by the sudden hostility, Chiron shrank back. He lowered his head, trying to apologize for his audacity and for disturbing the class. The instructor, however, ignored the class's mockery. With a welcoming gesture, he decided to grant the young man's wish and demonstrate wind magic. Aryan remained still, barely able to process the offer. The chance to see his dream come true seemed too surreal to be real. Suddenly, a gust of air enveloped him. The boy felt an invisible pressure lift his body, preparing him for something grand. Gravity lost its meaning. Aryan and all the students were launched into the skies simultaneously, floating above the academy under the master's command. The initial fear transformed into pure euphoria. Suspended in the air, Aryan reached out to the horizon, finally living the miracle he had studied so much. He spun uncontrollably, laughing as the wind supported him. The feeling of absolute freedom surpassed any literary description he had ever read. But the magic ceased abruptly. The ground approached at high speed, and panic took over the boy, who screamed, fearing the fatal impact. The expected shock, however, never came. A soft force cushioned the fall at the last instant, leaving him stunned and confused on the lawn. Aryan looked around, trying to understand how he had survived. The landing had been controlled with precision, sparing him any injury. Laughter echoed through the courtyard. The master and the students were amused by the scare, revealing that the apparent danger was part of the joke. Young Chiron remained crouched, his heart racing. Although he was safe, the adrenaline from the magical experience still made his body tremble uncontrollably. Aryan still felt his heart racing from the experience. The sensation of real magic surpassed anything he had imagined through books. The old wizard, however, did not reprimand him for the invasion. On the contrary, he began to explain that logical understanding was not the only path. Curiosity overcame fear. The young man shouted, desperate to understand the true essence of what he had just experienced. The noble students recoiled, scandalized. For them, that insolence and lack of decorum before the headmaster was an unforgivable crime. However, the instructor did not seem offended. He observed the boy's audacity and intensity with renewed interest. The protagonist ignored the tension around him. All that mattered at that moment was the answer that could change his life. The headmaster smiled, amused by the intruder's tenacity. He decided that this genuine passion deserved to be rewarded with knowledge. Aryan absorbed every word as if it were water in the desert. The definition of magic sounded more complex and fascinating than he had ever dreamed. The lesson expanded beyond the makeshift classroom. At that moment, the search for truth united the master and the commoner under the same shadow. The old man's enthusiasm grew as he spoke. He realized that this boy possessed an intuition and a hunger that many of his students lacked. The young man was stunned by the revelation. He expected punishment, but was receiving one of the most valuable lessons of his existence. The master used the situation to educate everyone. He suggested to his students that wisdom often hid, where no one expected to find it. Arian felt a flame of hope ignite. The possibility of learning magic, once an impossible dream, suddenly seemed tangible. But social reality imposed its cruel limits. The headmaster's gaze changed as he recognized the insurmountable barrier of the boy's lineage. The students readily agreed with the master's observation. The hierarchy was reaffirmed, reminding everyone who belonged in that world and who should stay out. Arian watched carefully, noticing the sudden change in the student's posture around him. One of the students announced she had reached the necessary state of concentration, focusing her mind to access the magic zone. The old instructor settled under the tree, pleased to begin a new practical perception test with his pupils. He held out his hand displaying some coins, challenging the children to understand the reality before them, not just count it. The master closed his fist quickly, concealing the objects and forcing the students to sustain the image in their memories. The girl strove to maintain the visualization, but the mental strain of holding that perception was exhausting her. The wizard opened his hand again, revealing the coins intact and waiting to see if anyone had understood the true lesson. Arian, however, had an epiphany. He realized it wasn't about numbers, but about feeling the entire situation as a unique and indivisible existence. The young man shared his conclusion with the group, leaving the noble colleagues surprised by his audacity and insight. The instructor's gaze sharpened. He noticed that this ordinary boy was touching on the essence of something much deeper. Arian argued with conviction, explaining that trying to isolate or erase the master's presence from the equation would be a logical impossibility. The old man smiled, genuinely impressed. The boy had instinctively grasped an advanced concept of magical perception. Following the flow of that teaching, Arian closed his eyes, disconnecting from the visual world to seek an internal connection. The goal now was to feel himself, anchoring his own existence before attempting to project his consciousness outward. His mind then expanded, transcending physical limits to attune itself to the vast network of mana around him. Arian focused entirely, isolating his perception. He understood that at that moment, only his mind defined reality. It was then that he felt it. The hidden presence became tangible in his consciousness, confirming that he had passed the test. The physical world remained static under the tree. While the others merely waited, the boy's spirit expanded invisibly. The instructor broke the silence, inquiring about the result. Arian, returning from the trance, prepared to answer the call. The old mage smiled with genuine approval. He immediately recognized that the young commoner had seen what the nobles had not. Arian blinked, stunned. The sound of the wind and leaves suddenly returned to his ears, pulling him from the deep meditative state. The director laughed, amused by the reaction. He explained that, by quieting the body, the boy could finally hear the true nature of sound. As he stood up, the master offered one last lesson. He revealed that spiritual phenomena belonged to a dimension higher than the physical. As a farewell, the elder patted Arian's head. That simple gesture validated the extraordinary potential he had just demonstrated. However, hierarchy prevailed. The director gathered his noble students to return to school, excluding Arian from the main group. The boy was alone again. He watched the learning opportunity drift away, reminded that he did not belong in that social circle. The mage looked back as he walked. The image of the lonely boy under the tree stirred a brief internal conflict within him. However, the old man coldly rationalized his decision. He concluded that the world was full of talented children, and he couldn't take them all in. Arian wasted no time on self-pity. He quickly scaled the wall, leaving the academy garden behind. The young man landed back on the city streets. Magic had been a brief experience. Now, he needed to return to his ordinary life. Arian tried to catch his breath, but his mind was far away, still trapped in the intensity of the experience he had just lived. The young man finally understood the magnitude of what he had felt during the test. It hadn't been imagination. The memory of that resounding sound echoed in his memory. He was certain that he had accessed the true spiritual zone. Arian felt tears streaming down, deeply moved by the confirmation that this magic was real and tangible. Driven by this epiphany, the boy darted through the city streets, unable to contain the energy that now filled him. Although the mystical connection had lasted only a brief moment, it had changed everything within him. In that second of ecstasy, Arian felt he had become infinity itself, completely losing track of his surroundings. However, physical reality abruptly asserted itself when he lost his balance and collided with someone. The impact was hard, throwing the boy awkwardly against the cold stone pavement. Stunned by the sudden fall, Arian looked up, realizing too late that his carelessness would have immediate consequences. He had bumped right into a group of men who didn't seem at all willing to tolerate accidents. Before he could explain, a heavy hand grabbed his clothes, questioning his sanity with brutality. The man pulled him close violently, ignoring the trembling apology that the boy tried to offer. Arian found himself hanging and helpless, clutching his own collar as he faced fear head-on. The aggressor, however, showed no sign of clemency. Keeping his gaze fixed and menacing on the child, Arian raised his face, surprised, noticing a presence that was completely out of place in that hostile environment. The man also stopped, confused, seeing a young noblewoman walking fearlessly through there, as if danger didn't exist. The aggressor, however, ignored the newcomer and grabbed the boy, who was desperately trying to explain that the bump was just an accident. With no patience for apologies, the brute delivered a violent kick, silencing the boy's protest by force. Arian collapsed on the cold ground, coughing and struggling to catch his breath as pain radiated through his body. As the young man tried to recover, the man continued to insult him, demanding threatening reparations. The torment amused the aggressor, who smiled with scorn and malice at his victim's fragility. However, amidst the pain, Arian's gaze changed. Fear gave way to a sudden, intense focus. Noticing that spark of defiance in the boy's eyes, the man readied his fist to punish what he saw as arrogance. The cronies just laughed at the situation, warning their friend to be careful and not leave visible marks on the child's face. Unable to physically fight back against so many opponents, the protagonist cowered, protecting his head and bracing for the worst. But the violence was interrupted. Firm footsteps echoed and stopped suddenly, imposing a new authority on the scene. The noble girl intervened decisively, placing herself as an impassable barrier between the aggressors and the fallen boy. The men's posture changed instantly before her status. They retreated cowardly, denying any wrongdoing. Ignoring the brute's lies, she crouched down, concerned only with checking on the injured young man. The boy remained on the ground, humiliated and crying. The physical pain was sharp, but the powerlessness in the situation hurt even more. However, the supposed savior had peculiar methods. The noble decided to use Arian's back as a seat, showing total contempt for both the victim and the aggressors. She coldly calculated that, being a commoner, the young man would not dare react. Arian felt the weight of those words crush his dignity, even more than the physical weight. Panic took over Chirone's mind. In his silent despair, he mentally cried out for his parents' protection. The girl continued her arrogant speech, treating the boy like property or a slave without free will. A cruel idea seemed to amuse her. The young noble laughed, considering forms of entertainment at the expense of others' suffering. The aggressors, however, misinterpreted the joke. With malicious smiles, they suggested an invasive body inspection, escalating the violence to a perverse level. Arian froze in terror upon hearing the order to undress. The nightmare seemed endless, and the humiliation was about to become complete. But the noble's reaction was one of immediate shock. She realized that these men were crazy and had completely twisted her intentions. Her amusement vanished, replaced by disgust and confusion. The situation had completely escaped her control. Suddenly, the world around Arian changed. Fear gave way to that strange and overwhelming focus he knew so well. The gang leader continued to laugh maniacally, oblivious to the drastic change in the atmosphere and the boy's gaze. A fly buzzed near the aggressor's mouth. To Arian's heightened senses, that small sound became the center of everything. Time seemed to slow down. The young man could perceive every tiny detail, from the beating of the insect's wings to the stillness of the man's eye. His perception expanded violently. He felt the presence of every living thing in the vicinity, from the rats on the ground to the predator in the skies. The physical world dissolved into a logical structure. Aryan felt his consciousness expand beyond his own body, accessing a different plane. Time seemed frozen. The boy perceived the presence of his aggressors, not as people, but as multiple vectors of movement suspended in the air. Faced with that surreal vision, Aryan questioned the nature of reality. The looming threat became just a mathematical pattern to be analyzed. As the physical attack approached, the protagonist remained still. He watched the trajectory of the blow with an unnatural calm, anticipating the impact. A sudden understanding exploded in his mind. Aryan's sensory perception overflowed, instantly manifesting as a pure and tangible energy. In physical reality, the aggressor grabbed him violently. However, the young man did not even react to the touch, staring at his opponent with a blank and penetrating gaze. Aryan entered a state of absolute focus. Fear disappeared completely, replaced by a cold, mechanical intensity that emanated from his being. The noble recoiled, alarmed and confused. She realized too late that the atmosphere around the supposed beggar had become dangerous. An invisible force violently repelled the attackers. They were thrown far away, screaming as they lost control over their own bodies in the air. Silence momentarily returned to the street. Aryan found himself sitting, alone at the epicenter of that inexplicable phenomenon, isolated by the residual energy. Confusion took over the boy's face. He blinked, trying to understand how the scene of aggression had suddenly changed to that stillness. The young lady watched the scene paralyzed by shock. Her eyes witnessed the impossible happening right before her, unable to process the logic of the event. Gravity reclaimed its dominion. Aryan looked up, horrified, as he saw the men plummeting from the sky like lifeless dolls. The impact was brutal and successive. The bodies of the aggressors collided against the pavement around the boy, who trembled before the involuntary violence he caused. Screams of pain immediately broke the air. One of the men writhed on the ground, feeling in his own flesh the price of having underestimated the young man. The aggressor, once menacing, now writhed on the ground, desperately begging for help. His accomplices fared no better, incapacitated and spitting blood from the brutal impact of the unseen force. The young noblewoman, horrified by the sudden outburst of violence, recoiled instinctively to protect herself. The initial shock on her face soon gave way to a defensive fury directed at the boy. She needed to reassert her superior position in the face of that terrifying, inexplicable phenomenon. With panicked tears, the girl shouted an insult about Shirone's humble origins, using her status as a shield. Without waiting for any response, she turned her back and hastily abandoned the scene. The lady ran with all her might, wanting to put as much distance as possible between herself and the young man. In her frantic and clumsy escape, one of her shoes ended up being thrown far away. Shirone, still in shock, was brought back to reality by the commotion of the surrounding residents. The boy shuddered, panic taking over as he finally processed the gravity of what he had just done. He watched isolated, the result of his uncontrolled power, surrounded by the bodies of those who attacked him. While the wounded cried out for medical help, Aryan's instinct for self-preservation took over, and he decided to flee. The boy darted off in a blind run, desperate to escape the guilt and consequences of that disaster. That night, the lesson learned was bitter and undeniable. The reality of that world was merciless. Far from the wild mountains, the big city continued its routine of opulence and tranquility. A new phase was about to begin in the lives of those touched by fate. The imposing mansion of the noble family stood out in the landscape, exuding power and age-old tradition. The patriarch of the house noticed his daughter's early return. He casually commented on the unusual arrival while enjoying his coffee. Amy, visibly on the defensive, tried to justify her presence there. The young noblewoman seemed to be hiding the real reason for her abrupt and angry return. The man ignored the excuses and returned to the newspaper. Frustrated with her father's indifference, the girl noisily climbed the stairs to escape the conversation. However, she stopped abruptly when she heard his warning. The father cautioned that her arrogance could result in an unpleasant surprise someday. The gentleman cast a perceptive glance over his shoulder. He knew that something had shaken his daughter's unwavering confidence that day. The memory of the recent confrontation flashed in Amy's mind. Her father's words echoed, touching an open wound in her wounded pride. The girl swallowed her vanity and made an unusual request. She urgently needed to know if her father had contacts at any magic academy. Meanwhile, in the isolated cabin, the atmosphere was one of pure anguish. Arian's mother awaited news, trying to keep her hands busy so as not to succumb to fear. The hunter, his face marked by tension, prepared to leave again. He was determined to find his missing son in the snow, no matter the cost. Later, the father held the trembling boy in his protective arms. The man heard the excuse that he had gotten lost, but his instinct told him something was wrong. Arian broke down in tears, tormented by his own nature. The young man cried compulsively, questioning the origin of the terrifying power he had unleashed unintentionally. The answer remained silent and cold as the winter around them. The mystery of that wild magic hung in the air, unexplained. Arian walked through the silent forest, ready to fulfill his daily task. The cold was intense, but his mind was focused on something much deeper. The icy air burned his lungs with each breath. He stopped for a moment, trying to calm his racing heart and regain focus. The memories of that day in the city still haunted him. Since the violent incident, the boy had not been able to manifest that destructive power again. He looked down, feeling helpless. The magic seemed to have been an isolated accident, something completely beyond his conscious control. However, something changed in his perception. Arian realized that by silencing his thoughts, he could access the spiritual zone again. The world around him transformed. He didn't just see a dead tree in front of him, but the very essence of matter pulsing. His senses expanded supernaturally. He could perceive every detail of the wood, its texture, density, and even the hidden aroma beneath the bark. The doubt disappeared, giving way to absolute clarity. He knew he was capable of interacting with it. Knowledge flowed directly into his mind. Arian understood the internal structure of the tree, as if it were an extension of his own body. Suddenly, an intense light revealed itself in his consciousness. He had found the exact breaking point, the perfect flow of energy. There were no words to describe the feeling, just pure instinct. His hands tightened around the axe handle, guided by an unwavering certainty. He moved his body in perfect harmony with his vision. The strike didn't require brute strength, just surgical precision, guided by magic. The blade came down swiftly, metal met wood, and the accumulated energy was released in a single devastating instant. The impact was much greater than expected. The massive trunk split in half instantly, yielding to the power the boy had channeled. Arian stood there, panting and trembling. The exhaustion was immense, but his eyes shone with the euphoria of finally understanding how to control his gift. His father watched from a distance, with an expression of pure anguish and disbelief at what he saw. Hidden behind the trees, he feared interrupting the painful process his son was voluntarily going through. Little Arian, still fragile, forced his body to the limit to saw the wood, trembling with exhaustion. However, his mind desperately sought to replicate the feeling of that magic he had felt in the past. The boy's unwavering dedication, driven by pure willpower, brought tears to the hunter's eyes. Arian clung to that book as if it were his own life, refusing to let go of his dream. He knew he needed to be ready for the one opportunity fate might offer him. 3 years passed. The young man, now more mature, remained still, cultivating patience in silence. Sensing the change in the environment, he stood up, ending his moment of introspection. The axe came down to work, but Arian's technique had evolved drastically in that time. Touching the trunk, he realized he no longer needed his eyes to see the truth of that structure. The blow was struck, guided not by brute force, but by a heightened sensory perception. He felt the exact breaking point, connecting his intention directly with the core of the wood. The released energy was explosive, destroying the obstacle in an instant of absolute power. With the task casually completed, Aryan remarked to himself about the extra training before returning home. Aryan Sharoneh maintained absolute focus, his senses sharpened beyond normal. He knew perception was the key to mastery. For 5 uninterrupted hours, the young man worked in a trance. Each movement of the axe was guided not by physical strength, but by a deep spiritual connection. He felt the forest breathe. Aryan perceived the moisture in the roots and the subtle movement of life in the soil, becoming one with the nature around him. The old instructor's words echoed in his memory. The boy understood that upon reaching that mental state, a whole new world would reveal itself before him. With the training completed, Aryan carried the burden of firewood and began the descent. The workday was over, but something new was about to begin. As he approached home, something stood out from the routine on the mountain. He noticed purebred animals grazing near the entrance, a rare sight at that altitude. An ornate carriage awaited in the courtyard. The young man dropped his load immediately, intrigued by the presence of such wealth in such a humble place. He opened the door to the house, curiosity overcoming fatigue. Aryan needed to find out who had traveled so far to get there. What he saw made him hesitate at the entrance. The atmosphere inside the cabin was charged with a solemn tension he did not expect to find. His parents were sitting at the table with the stranger. The hunter called his son, instructing him to approach and pay his respects to the visitor. The man introduced himself with a cold formality. He was Temuran, a butler in the service of the powerful Ogent family, and his presence commanded immediate respect. Aryan bowed in respectful greeting. Even surprised, he knew that etiquette was crucial in the presence of someone linked to the high nobility. Internally, however, confusion reigned. The boy questioned why servants of aristocrats would have any interest in a simple mountain boy. Without warning, Temuran invaded his personal space and held his face firmly. The butler demanded to know if the young man possessed a literate education. The old man assessed every detail of his expression with a critical gaze. Aryan felt exposed under that scrutiny, realizing he was being judged by criteria he did not know. The noble visitor assessed the situation with an air of superiority, beginning his proposal with a calculated and condescending tone. He praised Aryan's supposed filial loyalty, using it as an emotional lever to introduce an offer of servile work. The young man, however, was caught off guard by the sudden approach and hesitated, trying to understand the true intentions behind those words. The man's cordiality quickly disappeared, giving way to a cold seriousness as he prepared to stipulate the terms of the agreement. Aryan immediately recognized the value of the offer. Access to the Ogent family library meant obtaining magical knowledge that would be impossible for a commoner. However, the price of that privilege was absolute silence. The visitor made it clear that any indiscretion would be dealt with extreme severity. The threat was direct and brutal. If any information leaked, the consequence would cost not only Aryan's life, but his parents as well. Interpreting the family's tense silence as greed, the man tried to appease the situation by promising a generous financial reward. He implied that the parents were just profiting from having raised a useful son, a comment that deeply wounded the hunter's pride. Aryan's father exploded in fury, rejecting the idea that he saw his own son as a commodity or source of income. His only motivation in agreeing to the conversation was a genuine desire to see the boy have a chance to realize his impossible dreams. The visitor openly mocked that naive hope, ridiculing the idea that a boy from the mountains could become someone important. To him, Aryan was nothing more than a useful tool who knew how to read, and any ambition beyond that was just a pathetic delusion. The hunter clenched his jaw, trembling with indignation and helplessness at the utter contempt with which his family was being treated. Aryan, in turn, absorbed the insult in silence. The insurmountable barrier between nobility and his humble origins had never been so clear. The adoptive mother watched the scene tenderly. Even in that rustic cabin, the boy demonstrated an insatiable and peaceful curiosity. Aryan possessed a distinct, almost noble aura, but what really set him apart from the other children was his extraordinary and precocious intelligence. The hunter, however, covered his face in torment. He knew that the boy should have been educated in prestigious schools, not hidden in the mountains. Instead of books and magic, Arian's routine had been made of manual labor in the forest. Raw talent was being wasted cutting firewood. The father saw his son exhausted and felt the weight of every lost opportunity. That hard life was not what destiny had in store for the young man. Guilt consumed the mountain man. He felt he had committed a crime by raising such a promising child, as if he were just another woodcutter. Driven by despair, the man humbled himself before the visitor. He pleaded, extolling Arian's reading gifts and intellect to try to convince the noble. Tears of shame flowed freely. He was willing to renounce his own dignity to ensure a better future for his son. The hunter deeply regretted having to reach that point. The helplessness in the face of the noble's authority and wealth was overwhelming. The accumulated anguish turned into a visceral scream. It was the sound of a father who felt cornered by his own social condition. However, the realization that he was being despised changed everything. The hunter's sadness gave way to sudden indignation. Arian's father exploded in fury and ordered the immediate expulsion of the intruders. He decided that he would not tolerate disrespect within his own home. The noble adjusted his hat with cynical indifference. He interpreted the refusal only as an unfortunate consequence of that family's poverty. However, a calculating glint appeared in the visitor's eyes. He realized that the negotiation had failed, but his interest in the boy remained. Arian remained static as his father defended the family's honor. The direct confrontation had created a dangerous chasm between them and the elite. The noble issued a veiled threat, suggesting that rumors could be as lethal as a blade to the boy's neck. However, Arian did not back down. The young man faced the warning with a confident smile, unwavering in the face of intimidation. Amused by the boy's audacity, the visitor promised to persist until his goals were achieved, revealing his relentless nature. The man then withdrew, leaving behind a trail of tension and an uncertain future for the family in the cabin. The hunter, outraged, confronted his son. He would not accept Arian being made a scapegoat for the noble's greed. But his fury stopped when he looked at the boy's face. The father noticed something that completely disarmed him. Arian opened his arms, crying with gratitude. He thanked his father for allowing him to follow his dream, even if it was dangerous. The rustic man's resistance crumbled. Tears welled up, revealing the deep fear of losing the child he had raised. In a brusque movement, the hunter pulled Arian into a crushing hug, trying to protect his son from the cruelty of the world. Pain and love mingled on his face as he sobbed, unable to contain the flood of emotions. Between cries, the father made a solemn oath. He guaranteed that no one would ever hurt his family as long as he breathed. The mother watched the scene, drying her own tears, touched by the strength of the bond between the two. Arian allowed himself to be comforted, feeling the safety of his father's embrace one last time before everything changed. Later, reality set in. A contract was delivered, sealing the young mage's fate with the final signature. The hunter stared at the situation, stunned, processing that the agreement was done and there was no turning back. The hunter's hands trembled for a brief moment. He fought the instinct to hold his son, knowing he needed to let him go so he could have a future. The men pointed the way, hurrying his departure. Arian, however, couldn't help but take one last look back, seeking the comfort of the home he was leaving. The sound of footsteps fading away echoed like a final sentence. The physical distance between the boy and his old life increased with each second. The carriage door slammed shut with a dry thud. That sound marked the definitive barrier between his past in the forest and the uncertain future. Sitting among the strangers, the young man felt small and cornered. The men's smiles did not diminish the oppressive tension inside the vehicle. Suddenly, a wave of familiar energy washed over his senses. Arian closed his eyes, expanding his magical perception beyond the physical walls of the carriage. His mind captured the painful image that his eyes could no longer see. His parents, now alone, collapsed into an embrace filled with anguish and longing. The hunter consoled his partner, sharing a silent grief. Arian felt, through magic, the weight of the sacrifice they made by letting him leave. The wheels began to turn, kicking up dust on the road. The inertia of the movement signaled that there was no turning back. The journey had begun. The emotional connection felt like a hand reaching out into the void. The boy realized that, although he was leaving, their love was trying to reach him one last time. A tear escaped as he kept his magical focus active. Aryan clasped his hands, preserving that final image of his parents engraved in his memory. The carriage picked up speed, cutting abruptly along the road. The familiar landscape began to fall behind, turning into just a distant blur. The young man took a deep breath, accepting the destiny he had chosen. It was time to put aside the sadness and focus on surviving for the next few years. His destination was the kingdom of Thormia, in the distant capital. He was about to enter a vast world dominated by a family of renowned warriors. The companion explained the gravity of the new reality. Aryan was now under the tutelage of House Ogant, a powerful lineage that controlled the city's military forces. The coachman cast a meaningful look back, preparing the young passenger for what was to come. Aryan felt a chill in his stomach at the imminent arrival. The famous Ojan family estate stretched imposingly before them. The legendary driveway seemed endless, marking the definitive transition from simple village life to the center of power. The atmosphere in the place carried a solemn and ancient weight. The boy realized that even the air there seemed denser, imbued with the history and influence of the nobility. As he got out of the carriage, Aryan heard a disturbing warning from the men escorting him. They warned that this house did not house ordinary people, but true monsters in human form. The young man looked around, intimidated and fascinated at the same time. He tried to absorb every detail of that hostile environment, while being instructed not to lose focus and keep moving forward. The main residence stood like a fortress against the sunlight. The monumental scale of the building served to remind any visitor how insignificant he was before House Ujant. Every corner of the property exuded wealth and tradition. The ornate sculptures and fountains demonstrated that the power of that family flowed as freely as the water that ran there. The Ojant coat of arms, marked by strength and the sword, was engraved on the stone walls. Aryan understood that he now lived under the shadow and protection of that symbol. They walked towards an isolated tower on the grounds. The guide explained that this building served as accommodation for employees and would be the protagonist's new home. Inside the office, a gentleman with a rigid posture and severe air awaited. Aryan immediately realized that he was facing someone who demanded absolute discipline and would not tolerate mistakes. The senior butler stared at the newcomer with disdain, ordering him to follow him to receive his tasks. The boy, bowing in respect, nervously promised that he would do his best to fulfill his duty. The superior led the boy to a massive entrance. As the doors began to open, an intense light emanated from within, suggesting the grandeur of what was kept inside. What was revealed before Aryan made his heart race with pure emotion. It was the great library of the Ojans, a sanctuary of knowledge that surpassed his wildest dreams. Entire walls covered with books rose as far as the eye could see. As the young man admired the stupefied collection, he was informed that his role would be to take care of that literary treasure. The working conditions were clearly established. The service would be arduous during the day. However, the butler revealed the most important detail. After work, the free time would belong to Aryan. The senior butler paused, awaiting any hesitation or final doubts about the proposed agreement. For Aryan, the risk was worth it. The young man ignored any fear and immediately asked when he could take up the post. The answer was prompt and definitive. The service would begin the following morning in front of the imposing library. Already properly uniformed, the new servant began his routine, carrying the heavy administration files. He didn't just move paperwork. His fingers ran across the pages, seeking to understand the logic behind the records. While organizing the documents, the boy began to realize something fundamental about the nature of that task. A deep connection was revealed. All that dispersed knowledge was, in fact, interconnected. When placing each book on the shelf, Aryan understood that there was a central structure supporting all the information. The work was exhausting, but the boy's mind was buzzing as he deciphered the hidden pattern in those letters. He concluded that history functioned as the spine, the foundation, where all knowledge accumulated chronologically. The aspiring mage realized that by mastering history, he would gain the key to quickly absorbing any other discipline. This was the path to his dream. However, the sudden sound of the door opening broke his concentration. The young man closed the book in an immediate reflex, interrupting his studies before being caught. The senior butler entered the room, questioning if the boy was still organizing everything and working overtime again. Aryan straightened his posture and confirmed, disguising that his effort went far beyond a simple servant's obligation. The senior butler was relentless in his final instructions. He warned that the boy should take full responsibility for any failure that occurred. The supervisor's authority hung in the air. The old man didn't seem like someone who tolerated mistakes or flimsy excuses from a newbie. Suddenly, the instructor stopped and turned sharply to Aryan. The young man felt his heart race with the sudden and threatening approach. Feeling the heavy hand on his shoulder, the protagonist feared the worst. His mind panicked, imagining he had been caught reading during forbidden hours. The boy held his breath, paralyzed. He awaited the reprimand that would certainly result in his expulsion or the end of his nightly studies. However, the warning was only about appearance. The butler strictly ordered him to take care of his uniform and maintain an impeccable posture. The supervisor emphasized discipline with a stern gesture. He demanded that the new servant never lower the standard of the residence with any carelessness. Relieved that his secret remained safe, Aryan quickly said goodbye. He hid his previous nervousness with an obedient and trembling smile. With the end of the shift and the silence of the night covering the property, the boy's true goal could finally begin without interruptions. Alone in the vastness of the library, the young servant immersed himself in studies under the dim light, seizing every second of his conditional freedom. However, the content proved to be a brutal challenge. The boy struggled intensely to absorb complex information that defied his current understanding. Aryan questioned his own ability to understand the geopolitics of the kingdoms. He wondered if pure memorization would be enough to overcome those intellectual barriers. The excessive mental effort began to take its toll. The student's vision wavered as physical and mental exhaustion took over his senses. The weight of manual labor combined with intense study overcame his determination. The protagonist ended up succumbing to deep sleep on the study table. While his consciousness wandered, the mysterious book remained open. The words in an unknown language seemed to await, pulsing with magical secrets yet to be revealed. The elderly man found Shirone asleep amidst his duties. However, his reaction was not one of fury, but of deep boredom. He made a sound of disdain. For someone of his stature, the boy's failure was too insignificant to even deserve a scolding. The visitor decided it wasn't worth the effort and withdrew. The young man continued his rest, oblivious to the silent judgment he had just received. Later, Rian, a co-worker, checked the organization of the library. He confirmed if those were the volumes requested for the day. The senior butler picked up one of the books from the pile. He informed that the copy would be taken to the second young master. Sharon scratched his head, hesitant. The situation seemed irregular, and he feared that the removal of the books could cause problems. Rian, however, laughed at that excessive concern. He assured that the nobles would never notice the lack of something they rarely deigned to read. The protagonist listened in silence, still tense. He knew that true knowledge was hidden far away, out of everyone's reach. The colleague said goodbye cheerfully, leaving a final warning. The apparent freedom they had in the library was, in fact, a trap. Shirone understood the dark message. The nobility allowed small mistakes only because, if something really mattered, they would kill the servants without hesitation. A nervous smile appeared on his face as he connected the dots. He realized the real danger that the previous visitor represented. The boy cursed the old man and shot down the hallway. Urgency took over him as he noticed that he couldn't waste any more time. Suddenly, Sharona stopped his steps. Something blocked his path and interrupted his run abruptly. A blue-haired boy appeared before him, trembling and exhausted. The young man seemed to be fleeing from a strenuous physical obligation. Before Sharona could understand the situation, the other tried to escape desperately. Threatening shouts echoed behind him, promising punishment for the escape. The stranger grabbed Sharona urgently, imposing a confusing order before demanding absolute silence about his presence. Without wasting time, the intruder dove under the table, seeking refuge seconds before the authority arrived. The master entered the room emanating fury, his indignation making the very air vibrate with the tension of the moment. Sharon remained motionless before the imposing figure, feeling small and confused by the absurd situation in which he had been involved. The instructor's silence was heavy, a calculated pause that demanded immediate answers about the fugitive's whereabouts. Trying to hide his nervousness, the young protagonist offered a weak smile and tried to change the subject, mentioning the young master with false innocence. The elder's patience, however, ran out instantly. He demanded the truth with a ferocity that allowed no more games. Realizing that lying would be dangerous, Sharona gave up any loyalty to the stranger and accepted defeat. He pointed directly to the hiding place. Under the table, the fugitive was shocked to realize he had been betrayed so quickly. Furious at the betrayal, the boy stomped out of hiding and lunged at Sharona, grabbing him by the collar in a fit of rage. He threw himself over the furniture, ignoring the danger just to confront the one who had turned him in. Sharon recoiled instinctively, closing his eyes at the sudden outburst of violence from the cornered boy. The confusion, however, was short-lived. The master grabbed the troublemaker by the ankle and began dragging him out unceremoniously. Hanging upside down, the young master gritted his teeth, humiliated and glaring at the snitch. Alone again, Sharona watched the pathetic scene fade away, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment about what had happened. Aryan delved deeply into his studies, devouring dozens of history books to expand his knowledge base. The young man realized that, although the beginning was arduous, the works shared patterns that made learning easier. His mind worked incessantly, absorbing each concept in the hope of finding a loophole. However, he soon understood the existence of an insurmountable barrier between the common intellect and the occult. Sharona lamented the fact that, no matter how much he read, entry into the spiritual zone remained close to him. Faced with this obstacle, the boy decided to change his learning strategy. If he couldn't access magic directly, he would master the absolute theory through ancient scriptures. Aryan maintained the conviction that this intellectual path would eventually turn him into a true mage. Suddenly, the tranquility of the environment was shattered by an angry scream coming from the entrance. The blue-haired boy reappeared, foaming with rage and yelling insults at the one who had exposed him. Sharona was jolted from his thoughts, stunned by the violent interruption and the hostility. The intruder marched aggressively towards him, demanding satisfaction for the betrayal he suffered. He revealed the brutal physical effort he made, climbing cliffs countless times to get there in secret. The protagonist listened tensely, realizing that he had ruined an immense sacrifice without knowing it. The noble confronted him face to face, shouting that all that suffering had been in vain just because Aryan had turned him in. The intruder refused to listen to Sharona's logic. To him, the protagonist's honesty sounded like an unforgivable betrayal. Sharona realized that words would not reach someone consumed by anger. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. Seeing no other way out, the young man asked what it would take to resolve the impasse. The submission in Sharona's voice, however, awakened something unexpected in the other boy. The intruder smiled disdainfully, convinced that he was being belittled by someone he considered inferior. Under the night sky, he ordered the protagonist to accompany him. The time for words was over. Sharona reluctantly obeyed, following him to an isolated hall where no one could interrupt them. The answer to the conflict came flying through the air. The boy threw a weapon in Sharona's direction. Out of pure reflex, Sharona grabbed the object, shocked to realize he was wielding a training sword. The rival immediately assumed his combat stance. He demanded a duel to satisfy his wounded pride. Shirone protested, incredulous. The idea of fighting physically seemed absurd to someone focused only on studies, but the cold determination in the opponent's eyes made it clear that there would be no retreat or negotiation. The protagonist felt the atmosphere change drastically. That murderous look indicated a real and imminent danger. Arrogant in the face of the obvious difference in skills, the swordsman offered an advantage. Shirone could attack 3 times without suffering retaliation. However, Shirone's fear was purely pragmatic. If he broke a bone in that stupid confrontation, he would be sent back home in disgrace. Shirone felt the imminent danger freeze his blood. His instincts screamed that the attack would come before he could even process the situation. Without any combat training, the youth acted on pure reflex, raising the wooden weapon in a desperate defensive gesture. The impact was brutal and immediate. The force of the blow reverberated through Shirone's bones, almost knocking him down instantly. He gritted his teeth, fighting against the pain. The weight of the attack was overwhelming, pushing him to the limit of his physical endurance. Shirone's hands trembled violently. He felt the wood of the sword begin to give way under the crushing pressure of the uneven duel. The blue-haired swordsman gave no respite. He increased the intensity, pushing the blade down to collapse the boy's defense. Shirone saw the fury in his opponent's eyes. That relentless attack made it clear that the intention was to seriously injure him, not just win. A cruel smile appeared on the aggressor's face. He reveled in the situation, savoring the fear and fragility of his prey. The protagonist realized he wouldn't last long. He coldly calculated that in that state, he only had the energy to withstand one more attack. He needed total focus. Shirone expanded his senses to the maximum, ignoring the fear to find a single opportunity for survival. The rival pulled back his weapon, accumulating an intimidating aura of power. He prepared the final blow to end the confrontation for good. Finding Shirone's posture strange, the swordsman questioned the tactic, but brought the blade down with redoubled violence to crush him. The attack came down heavy and inevitable. The aggressor felt it would be impossible to miss, confident that his brute strength would prevail. However, the rival's triumphant smile vanished instantly. A dry and alarming sound of rupture echoed through the hall, catching him by surprise. To his absolute shock, the sword he wielded exploded into pieces. Shirone's precise defense had destroyed the attacker's weapon. The youth barely had time to process the shock of the impact. To his utter disbelief, the metal sword not only stopped, but exploded into pieces before his eyes, destroyed by the very force of the blow against his absolute defense.